Welcome to the Wild Physio podcast with your host, Andrew Wild. Today, I'm super excited. I've got Simon Jones on, and Simon and I have been following each other on Instagram for a while. I've never actually met Simon other than today via Zoom, and I'm really excited for this. He's probably our most senior member of the podcast at 57 years young, which is getting on there. Now, in terms of his career, I want to give him the due credit for this really amazing career. He trained as a commando paramedic in 1981, and then he graduated as a chartered physiotherapist in 1992. I want to dive into what happened with the whole paramedic into physiotherapy journey. And he continued to serve in the military as a senior physio within the Royal Marines and Royal Navy Medical Services, leaving in 1996. He currently still holds a part-time NHS position as a first contact practitioner specializing in musculoskeletal physiotherapy, and he's keen on how this role will develop into the future. His career as a physio has spanned many arenas within the professional sporting realm. This has included Premiership and Championship rugby, Formula One, endurance motorsport, the PGA and European Golf Tour, which I love, including the Ryder Cup of 2012 with the European team. He's currently the head of performance for Cambridge University Rugby Union and one of the physiotherapists to the Barbarians Football Club rugby union team. He's still passionate about his work in motorsport, which reaches all the way back to 1999 with his introduction into F1. I really want to dive into the driver's side of things. A huge welcome to Simon Jones.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Very kind.
I reckon I could have gone on there.
I feel honoured.
I reckon I could have gone on for another 5 minutes there, mate. Your resume is rather large. I suppose that's a product of being around the block for a while, but also you've done a lot of different things during your career and hasn't followed, a specific sort of linear path, has it?
Yeah, no, that's fair to say. I think it's more of a product of just getting old, isn't it? Really. No, it hasn't. Far from it. When I just wrote that bio to send over to you, just realized that it's obviously been a lot of years and a lot of different things, but to be honest, I like the element of change. I like doing lots of different things. I like that I've done lots of different things, and I think it all blended in nicely to allow me to take quite an empirical view of healthcare generally and physiotherapy and where I feel we're going and where I like our profession to be. But I'm sure there's a bit of discussion there.
Mate, the first question I've got is, how did it come about transitioning from paramedics, so being a paramedic, into the physio world?
So it all came about a bit by accident. So most of my sort of paramedical career in the military tended to be with either search and rescue helicopter squadrons, and purely by accident, one day we used to have this narrative come around every day, a thing called daily orders, which sort of tells you what's going on in the military base every day and some sort of just points of note that people might be interested in. And there was an article on there one day which just briefly mentioned about that they were looking for suitable candidates to train as physios. And I was toying with the idea of leaving the military at the time anyway, and I thought I'd apply for it. And I duly applied, got accepted. And then ironically, they closed down the Joint Services School of Physio because of funding, which is where I would have gone to train. But they gave us an opportunity to find a place at a civilian school and sponsor us through. So, I hit it very lucky. I was very, very privileged to be able to stay in the military, train as a salaried student at a civilian school, which was just amazing, really. So, it again, a lot of things that happened in my career have just pretty much been just an opportunity that sat in front of me, and I've never wanted to turn an opportunity down. So that's how I ended up drifting into physio, really, which I'm glad I did.
And during your career, you've obviously worked with a lot of different sports over the years. You're currently working with a lot of drivers. Now, let's dive into this because I'm really excited to listen to you about your role as a physiotherapist within the driving arena. How did it all come about getting into being the physio for a driving team or a driver? How did it all come about?
So again, another opportunity that just landed on the plate purely by accident. So it actually came via rugby. So when I left the military, I went to work in London for a year in a quite highbrow sports clinic, but it was pretty clear I wanted to, my passion was in rugby, and I wanted to get into, certainly I wanted to get into a full-time club job because rugby had just gone professional at 96, 97. And so there was the ability there to do that. I actually went for a job at Harlequins in London, didn't get that. But ironically, at the time, I was looking after one of the Harlequins players in the clinic I was working at in London. He suggested to me to go and chat to the coach at Bedford, which was the ex-England coach, Jeff Cook. I ended up moving to Bedford. Bedford, over 2 seasons I started with them. Unfortunately, they hit financial crisis like a lot of these clubs did early in professionalism, paying extortionate salaries to players that they possibly just couldn't, the figures didn't match. Bedford hit bad times. I looked for a route out, ended up applying for a job at Gloucester Rugby. Gloucester at the time was owned by a chap called Tom Walkinshaw, who was very big in the motorsport world as well as rugby. He owned Arrow's Formula One team and Gloucester Rugby. I arrived at Gloucester Rugby. Within the first week, I got a phone call from his PA, who basically said they got one of the Formula One drivers who got a problem with his neck, and could I go and see him? We drove to Tom's house, saw this guy who turned out to be Jos Verstappen, Max's dad.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I treated Jos, went back to Gloucester, kept on with my handover, then got another phone call from his PA to say, look, actually, can you come back and have a chat with Tom? He'd like to talk to you about potentially moving to the F1 team. And, it went from there, really. And I ended up moving to, it was Orange Arrows F1. I moved there with my first 2 drivers were Jos, who obviously is Max's old man, and another chap, Spanish guy, Pedro de la Rosa, who both of whom have remained really good friends. So that was my intro. Again, purely by accident, just a real one-off, really. So I couldn't turn it down. I was quite passionate about F1 as well. My 2 sports I was interested in was F1 and rugby, and the opportunity came to dive around the planet. So why not?
That's just remarkable. And I think a lot of physios think that it's all about just hard work. But at the same time, often this happens with someone's career where it's just right place, right time.
100%. Yeah.
There is that element of luck.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be the first one to admit, I've never considered myself the best physio on the planet by any means. That, I think I'm pretty competent at what I do. In the next breath, I know there's way, way better than me. But, opportunities fall in your lap. And those opportunities, I think, get better the more you end up picking up even small opportunities. You get a greater network of people, and things lead to other things. And I think I've just been very lucky like that, really. So, I thank my lucky stars every day that I've had the opportunities I've had. So, that's.
I have a lot of physio students and also new grad physios that listen to this podcast, and they're probably wondering, what the hell does a physio do with drivers, and what is your role?
Okay, that's a question I often get asked, and having experienced quite a lot of different aspects of motorsport. So if you take the 2 elements that I'm really been involved in, obviously Formula One and the endurance motorsport now, which are both very different roles. So if you take Formula One, first of all, one, you've got to be a pretty competent practitioner. That's for sure. And your role really involves a variety of things, and it can be literally anything. If you take, the current crop of drivers, so most people will see, the circuit, they'll see Lewis with Angela, his physio, Max with Brad, his physio, Brad Scaines, who I know and get on with really, really well. So their role is very much first of all, it's you're pretty much a driver's companion from the moment they get up in the morning to the moment they hit the hay at night. Your responsibility is pretty much not only just about their physical management, it's about their organising their medical management. It can be organising their daily management. It's literally their right-hand person you are, pretty much. For most things. I mean, I've done everything from ordering hire cars for people, booking dinner for people, organising consultant appointments, making sure that from a physical management that their fitness program is well balanced over a year, and keeping them generally well. But I think the most important thing out of all of that is you need to get on with that driver. And if you don't get on with that driver, you're out the door before you know it. Because if the dynamic doesn't work, it just isn't going to work. And I've experienced that with one driver where actually I pulled the plug on it because I just felt actually the dynamic just wasn't very good. But apart from that, it's very much a sort of, you're a medical manager really. I think you can overhype the rule. You can overhype the role a little bit if you like. It's a difficult role. It's challenging because you've got a lot of things to weigh up. Not only keeping them fit and healthy and well over the year, making sure they cope with their time zone changes really well, making sure that your nutrition's up to scratch. Most of the drivers are pretty smart. They understand what they need to do to get into the car. Some are very fitness centric, so they're easy to manage. So you take somebody like, my first experience when I worked at Arrows, my first two drivers, Jos and Pedro. Pedro, very, very keen on his fitness, really easy to manage. Didn't really need a whole heap of input from me in terms of how we kept him fit over the year. He had a fitness coach at home in Spain who I used to liaise with, and we would just oversee the program between the two of us. Jos, a bit more of a reluctant trainer, took a bit of coaxing into getting him to do some stuff, but eventually actually came around quite nicely, and actually we found a program to suit him. And again, it's just making things enjoyable for what he needs to get in the car. But when I took him over, he wasn't the fittest of characters by any means. But you could throw him in a car and he'd quite happily do 100 laps of some horrible circuits and cope with it really well. They're very driver fit. But I think most of the guys now have realised that there's a bit more to it than that, and being fit is important. I also used to look after Mark Webber in Formula 3000.
Really? Wow.
Mark, yeah. So Mark was a sort of reserve driver for Arrows at the time. But as most people know, Mark is a fit guy and takes his fitness very seriously, and just used to look after himself incredibly well. So somebody like him, again, really easy to manage.
So how much of your role is in the strength and conditioning sort of fitness realm, or do most of these drivers have their own strength and conditioning coach or personal trainer or fitness professional as well as a physio?
It's a bit of a mix, really. I think my role, I would say, I used to quite comfortably manage both roles quite well. So I have an interest in strength and conditioning, and obviously my physio background enabled me to do both roles. There are a number of drivers, even in today's crop, who've probably got separate coaches and use separate physios. Again, take Brad and Max as a good example. Brad's got an extremely good understanding of strength and conditioning, writes his programs well for him, balances what Max needs, also covers all his physio needs for him as well. Take your Australian buddy, Danny Ricciardo. He's got Michael with him, who's a strength and conditioning coach, and they will obviously clearly have another person on the team who will deal with either his physio needs or if he needs anything medically. So it's a real mixed bag generally. I think if you can do two jobs, you're much more, you're a better candidate for that type of role. It just makes life a lot easier if you can manage both areas, which I think a good majority of them do, really, in fairness.
Which makes complete sense. And it's, I suppose, my mantra of, the hybrid therapist model of being a great physio, but also a strength and conditioning coach, and trying to merge the two fields. And by the sounds of it, that's exactly what these drivers are looking for in the F1 realm.
Yeah, totally. I just think that's a nice phrase, really. You need to be that. You need to have that hybrid ability. It really depends as to how intense the guys are as regards their fitness and what they feel their own needs are, and how interested in fitness they are. Because we've all come across it. I'm sure I speak for all physios and trainers who've been involved in motorsport. Drivers are an interesting breed generally, because some are very keen to do stuff in the gym, some people aren't. I know there's drivers who much prefer to do stuff away from the circuit and concentrate on much more stuff like jet skiing, playing lots of football and keeping themselves generally pretty fit. and you've just got to fill in the blanks to make sure that actually they do their bit of stuff in the gym that will keep them strong enough to be able to cope with what they need in the car.
And what is that?
Lucky. So
what are the focus areas around, you know, an F1 driver's fitness regime that they're doing? You know, the strength side of things, the cardio, what type of fitness does an F1 driver or any type of driver really need? Because a lot of physios would probably have no idea. And I think I have never really loved motorsport, but I've gotten into it because of Drive to Survive. On Netflix.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of sucked me in. Like when the third season came out, I was like, yes, I'm on. I devoured that thing within like a day, and it's awesome. Like I get so into it. I know all of the drivers, but at the same time, I've never been in that sport, and a lot of physios would never have been close to working in that sport. Now, what does an F1 driver or any driver need in terms of fitness and strength and those type of things?
Sure. I think in terms of undoubtedly, you've got to tick the box on. They've got to have a good aerobic base. That's for sure. They need to be generally cardiovascularly pretty fit, and most of those guys across the board pretty much are. I don't think there's anybody sitting in the pit lane currently who doesn't fit that mold. That's for sure. In terms of more specifics, very much upper limb, neck strength in Formula One is a big area of focus. More so because fairly heavy G forces, and if you Brad's written a really nice article actually on his website which just looks at actually what that means in terms of numbers, but if you take G forces coming through a car which are hitting you at all sorts of angles, your average G force in an F1 car somewhere between 5 to 6 G, sometimes a bit more. But if you take that in terms of the weight of the helmet and the weight of the driver's head, which probably about 7 to 8 kilos, times that by 6, 40 plus kilos of weight in terms of G-force you're going to have coming through your head. So to have a pretty strong, resilient neck is an important thing. And that changes as well. And other things to bear in mind is that, some of the circuits are clockwise circuits, some are anti-clockwise circuits. So when they hit anti-clockwise circuits, they're often physically, it's a bit more demanding for them because they don't spend a lot of time doing that. So again, just making sure that empirically across the board, they're really strong. I used to spend an awful lot of time doing lots of upper limb, trunk, neck strengthening work with all my drivers, and I don't think that's changed. Nothing's changed at all because there's no need to. It's a working formula. We've got a lot more ways now with things like the G trainer of being able to put some data into that process and looking at peak neck forces, which is has changed the ball game dramatically. In terms of anything else specifically, I think for me, I just used to like to keep my drivers on the go doing something. I was very lucky that when I started in F1 and worked with Jost, he was teammate with Michael Schumacher at Benetton a few years previously. And so there was a very good relationship and those two got on really well. And I was very lucky enough to go on a couple of training camps with the two of them. So it was interesting watching how somebody like Michael, who pretty much was the instigator of a lot of fitness-based work in Formula One. He was the guy that we used to look to, pretty much, who was probably the fittest of the pack at the time. But it was very interesting watching what he did, and a lot of it was just general fitness. There was nothing outrageously strange about it. Played a lot of football, played a lot of tennis, did his little bit of stuff in the gym that he knew he needed to do to keep himself car fit and car strong. But then the rest of it was, he just had a good demeanor on life. Good nutrition, all the sensible stuff. Again, nothing that stands out of the norm. I think again, we can overhype the role within Formula One, but it's really just being a good wellness coach really to these guys. Sometimes that for me is the sort of key to it.
I think a lot of the younger physios will probably want to know what type of neck strengthening exercises do you do to create the strength necessary for an F1 driver that's trying to combat all these forces. What do you use?
Sure. So everything from weighted harnesses to tech. When I worked with Yoss, for instance, we had a Technogym machine was made for us specifically, which I sent one of his seats from the car off to the Technogym factory, and they fitted it into like a cradle. So we had a cradle and a weighted steering wheel and a series of pulleys. which again, straightforward, lots of isometric work. The GS trainer now is pretty much standard piece of kit for neck strengthening within F1. I think, being brutally honest, there's very little that we can do apart from straightforward strengthening exercises that will replicate those forces that come through a Formula One drive, because those chief forces are coming from lots of different angles.
Great point.
They always used to, my team boss at Arrows years ago used to say to me, he said, if I could put a driver in a car and do 70 laps of Barcelona and they're not fucked at the end of it, then I'm not interested in them, really. He'd say it's an adaptation process. So they need to be. You need to keep them fit outside the car, but realistically, you've got to put them in the car and they've got to be able to drive some miles. And I think if you ask any of the trainers in Formula One, they would probably agree with that. That's fair. It's really difficult to replicate it. You can do the best you can, but when I worked at Arrows, we had a 3-seater car. It was a bizarre looking car. It was so driver in the front and 2 passengers in the back, and it was really for taking press people around circuits just to see, what the effect of sitting in an F1 car was like. So I actually Jos took me around Silverstone in it for 18 laps, which was interesting. And honestly, it just absolutely amazing. And this was slower than a Formula One car as well, in fairness. It was about, I think at the time, probably about 700 horsepower engine. So at the time, there were 800 plus, those things. And we did 18 laps of this, and I got out of the car, and I just thought, there is no way that anything I do outside of this car replicates that at all. And because in the position I was sitting, I was able to watch what the driver's neck was doing in terms of his ability to be able to come back to a neutral position. And just, comparatively, we'd hit around the corner and I'd be sort of a little bit like this, pulling my head back up, and it's literally bang, 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 bang. So it's an adaptation process. The more miles they do, the better they get at it, and the stronger they get at it. It's, good old adaptation to process, isn't it, really?
Yeah, 100%. I even mentioned this today to a client of mine that's a swimmer, and they were asking me about the things they should be doing in the gym. And I was like, no matter what you do in the gym, you could do all the tricep and lat work in the world, but if you don't swim for 4 months and you get back in the pool, you'll be pretty bloody sore through your lat and your tricep, because you can't replicate that specific loading. So I completely agree. And I assume a lot of the loading that you would do with these guys is a lot of isometrics, because the range of motion really isn't that great when they're in the car, is it?
Like, no, it's really small.
Yeah, it's tiny. So I assume it's a lot of isometric stuff.
Yeah. Again, there's some great resources around to have a look at that. But if anybody's interested in that stuff, I would probably point them to give Brad another chuck up to Brad's website, Brad's website, because
Brad's Gaines.
Physio, yeah, Bradley Gaines. So he's the performance coach with Max Verstappen. Really good guy, and he's got some lovely stuff on his website, which just really gives a nice insight into what drivers need and what they do, really. And again, some nice examples of some exercises and things that he's put together. So yeah, that's a good resource to have a look at.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic, because, I've never really talked about physio in the driving world before. And, this is new to me as well. And I had an idea of what you'd probably do, but at the same time, I've never worked in the field. So now, if there was a physio out there and they were like, I want to do that, I want to work in F1, or I want to work in some type of driving sport, how would you do it? Do you just put yourself out there, drop a few lines? What do you do?
Yeah, I think there's certainly routes into F1. For me, if anybody's interested in motorsport, then look at all levels. So interestingly, I've now moved to endurance motorsport, which is an interesting but very different aspect of motorsport to be involved in. But if you want to get involved in it, I'm just still a big fan of write to everybody, drop emails to everybody, because if frankly, if you piss off enough people, somebody will answer you at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
I might just give you a shot. And I think that's pretty much about it. I have plenty of students who drop me a line. I've had plenty of physios who spent some time with me. And some who've gone on to cover some motorsport events for us. So There's, I always think persistence pays off eventually.
Exactly. So, the old quote from Wayne Gretzky: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take."
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
totally
that's
agree.
great. I think that's great advice. What you said, just piss a lot of people off and send out heaps of
Yeah,
emails, and just, you never know, and you might be in the
yeah,
right place at the right time, like you were, and then all of a sudden you've got
yeah,
this amazing career ahead of you in the driving world. So, no,
yeah,
great advice.
yeah,
Now, in
yeah,
terms of the industry, the
yeah.
physio industry, the changes you have seen and the bullshit you've seen over the years, and even the things that you were taught at uni that you were skeptical about, or you were skeptical about any type of therapy throughout the years. How has the industry changed in your opinion? Because you've been around a lot longer than I have. No offense. And what are your
No offense
thoughts?
taken. So, it's an interesting one, really. So if I go back to uni times, if I'm brutally honest, as much as I really enjoyed my physio undergraduate degree, there wasn't a whole heap of it was hugely useful, because I think we were still sitting in the days of doing butterfly wing modes on people, which just now, when I look at that, as I'm sure you agree, bit of a disaster. I think fundamentally, the root values of what we do, getting people moving, is still a huge point. But there just seems now, over the last few years, to be a bit of a reluctance on that front. We just seem to be, with some of the roles that are appearing, and one of those being first contact practice to a degree, we're shifting the paradigm a little bit, as though we're moving much more towards this sort of biomedical role, and actually, to a degree, not forgetting that actually we're about getting people moving, and it doesn't have to be overtly scientific. As regards the bullshit, I think I've experienced the same as everybody who's a bit skeptical about things. Lots of fluff around, and I'm not a big fan of fluffing people. I think that a lot of it is just filled with bad narratives, and your stuff like the whole K-tape thing, which just still bugs me to this day, and people's understanding of of how it's perceived to work just frightens the living daylights out of me, that people actually believe that. Things like cupping. I had a discussion with a driver at the weekend who said, I go for cupping twice a week and it's really useful. And to sit there and listen to this, and more so listen to the narrative being spun by the practitioner. It's an embarrassment. It's just an embarrassment to think that one, actually there's people out there are sending that narrative across. But even worse, that people are believing it. But when I think sometimes what concerns me is that we can sell shit to patients who are in pain and bloody vulnerable.
Yes.
And that worries me, and that still worries me. And I think one of the things that I've found over my career is that hasn't changed that much, and there's still a lot of that goes on. And I'll be the first one to admit there's lots of stuff I've done in the past with patients that I've thought I'm doing a lot of good, and probably I believed that at the time. But I think as you go on in your physio career, or I've found at my age now, is that there's lots of stuff I still try and engage with, but I still want to stay as up to date as I can in practice. And I think it's very easy to just take an easy route and not do that. And I think there are, sadly, I've experienced that myself. And there's a lot of good people, for instance, that work in the NHS in this country. But also in the healthcare system, it's an easy place to hide if you don't want to stay up to date on stuff. You can get away with it. That's the bottom line. And that might be controversial, but so be it. And I think that one of the things I've always tried to do is at least try and be as up to date as I can, and certainly stay in the game. I don't want to be a passenger in this profession. I experienced something a few years ago, which interestingly enough, it was my last job when I was in the forces. I had a physio who came to work with me, who actually at the time was the physio for Glasgow Rangers Football Club, and he was looking at taking a role as a civilian physio in a military base. And he had a very sort of archaic view of what physio was about. And it's ironically, his views have stayed with me 20 odd years down the road, and just thought, I don't want to be in that same place that you're at now, which is you're just looking for an easy ride. And so I think the key to being good physio is challenge yourself all the time, question everything. Don't take something at face value. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. I know it's an age-old phrase, but I think it's really true. Challenging yourself, staying up to date, staying ahead of your CPD, always picking up something. Lockdown for me has given me a little bit of opportunity to catch up on loads of stuff. I've become a massive YouTube freak these days, and somebody in their late 50s becoming a huge YouTube freak, because I've just worked out there's everything on YouTube. If you can't find something about life, you'll find it on YouTube. And then there's so much in the way of resources, into podcasts, yours of course, and loads of other podcasts that I just find it's just simple stuff, and you can do CPD sitting in your car. It's not difficult stuff to do, but it's a case of you either want to be a passenger or you want to be driving the car, and I'd rather be driving the car. Certainly not a Formula One car, but well.
That's a great way to put it, and I completely agree. I think people leave the blinkers on for too long, and you've got to broaden your horizons. And you hit the nail on the head when you said you got to question everything. Because I remember being at uni, and some of the things we were getting taught, I was like, no, like how are we getting taught this bullshit? And as my career has progressed, what I've done has shifted, and it needs to shift.
Yeah.
If it doesn't shift, you're not up to date.
Yeah.
But I think the other point is evidence is a long way behind the practical application currently. They say that it's like, 10 to 15 years behind, the current practice. So evidence is catching up eventually, but it's a long way behind. So you need to be a critical thinker, and you need to push yourself, and you need to learn as much as possible. But yeah, I completely agree, mate. You need a shift, and things will change. Yeah. And what you were doing 10 years ago will be very different to what you're doing now.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me, if I take my own personal journey, my biggest change in practice, I've done plenty of courses over the years. I've been through the whole gamut of the manual therapy thing, spent thousands on, getting credentialized in everything under the planet. And now pretty much can say that I've moved away from the good majority of those things. And the biggest change for me was about 2011, 2012. I decided, right, I need to take a jump out of my own comfort zone. And although I'd spent a lot of time working with S&C coaches, I was interested in that very definitive area between what constitutes strength and conditioning and what constitutes rehabilitation, and how do you jump seamlessly between the two? And actually, should you jump seamlessly, or should it just be one big continuum? And so I thought, right, do you know what? I'm going to go find myself a decent S&C course, and I went off to study at Middlesex Uni, and I remember driving away from my first lecture on an S&C course, and literally sat there thinking, what the fuck have I been doing with my patients for the last 20 years?
Yeah.
Because I just thought that I was as guilty as many of lots of under-challenging, under-loading rehabilitation, and basically, providing Voltaire with his ultimate panacea to rehabilitation, which is amuse people for a few weeks until nature gets them better. Which I still use on a regular basis in terms of saying that to patients, and it seems to at least ring a few laughs more than anything. But I think that for me personally was the biggest change in my practice. That had a massive change on how I viewed things physio wise, and I think that one of my biggest areas of interest is how we actually replicate a bit more strength and conditioning education into undergraduate physio.
Yes,
because that is seriously lacking.
Yes,
and
amen,
I don't think
amen to that, mate. Seriously, it's a massive problem over here as well. There's not enough strength and conditioning.
Really?
Oh, it's terrible. Like, these poor new grads are coming out and they've just got no strength and conditioning knowledge. It's very, very minimal. For a shoulder, it's some TheraBand external rotations, and you're just tearing your hair out thinking, what are they doing at uni? Like, they need to be better. And it's just so frustrating. And you can tell that you're frustrated with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, taking my experiences from sport, so working in my current role with Cambridge Uni. So, we take those students and for a 3-month period, effectively try and turn the program into like a professional athletes program. So they get great S&C support, good physio support, good nutritional support, all working up towards a varsity match in December. So I'm very lucky enough there to work with an S&C coach who has an extremely good understanding of medicine and musculoskeletal medicine across the board. I like to think that my understanding of S&C is sufficient. I've never wanted to be a purist S&C coach, and I don't think I would make a very good S&C coach in terms of being a purist S&C coach. But I think the hybrid process for me is where I comfortably sit. So with Jim Bob, my S&C coach at Cambridge, the two of us together actually, I think, deliver a pretty good product because we're very complementary about each other's specialist areas and can pretty much make sure that all points are covered. And that to me is a beautiful system to work in. It's great. That I still hold that as one of my gold standard projects. And I'm also very lucky to work with my physio and compatriot Nick, a guy called Nick Allen, who's my practice partner. Nick is very much S&C physio orientated as well. So, we have a nice sort of very clear opinion of where we want our practice to be. We're not fans of fluff. So sometimes fluff is needed, but, fluff that's not too fluffy.
A lot of, agreed, mate. But a lot of physios can learn a lot from strength and conditioning coaches. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot of physios come out and they think that they know everything, and that typical new grad physio, they're just trying to learn their way and they think they should learn just off physio. But I think learning off an S&C coach is so beneficial, and going and doing S&C courses and spending time in the gym as well yourself to learn what to do, how a gym operates, just the equipment and everything. It's just so important to do some time in the gym as well.
Yeah, I think we can be, we certainly can be quite, physios tend to be quite disparaging of personal trainers as well.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons. And some of that I can understand, especially if you've had bad experiences with it. But, I've learned a whole load of stuff, some really good stuff off some very good personal trainers who have just given me lots of different applications of how to change things, how to take a different approach to things. Just how they interact with people. There's so much we can learn from those people. And in terms of, I would challenge any young physio against, if I was battling them against a good PT, I'd say, a good PT would absolutely jump on them hands down in terms of any gym related work. That's for sure. So I really try and encourage young physios not to be too disparaging about PT, because I think they're no lesser of profession than we are. They're just different to how we are. And actually, there's a lot to learn from what they do. So, I push that one quite a bit.
Yeah, there should be less of a hierarchy. That's for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Now, there was a topic you wanted to discuss, was the quality of physio in professional sport. What do you want to discuss, mate?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting one for me, this. So, I obviously, having had a reasonable amount of experience at looking at physio and medical setups within the professional hierarchy of sport. And you'd assume that medical care would be absolutely gold standard in every respect. And the sad reality is, my own personal experiences of it's not always the case. And sometimes they are very prone to huge amounts of bullshit. Football is quite dramatic for that, really, because they can get chewed up into, sending players off to have, injections of snake's piss or whatever it is they poke into you, or they can just get dragged into all sorts of weird and wonderful therapies for things. And lots of people get involved in medical care who don't necessarily are the wrong people to ask, and it just, I think, probably my empirical view of what goes on at sport is, it's not always what we perceive it should be. And interestingly, there is some great medical care goes on. So don't get me wrong, I'm not being disparaging of people across the board and medical teams across the board, because I think there's some absolutely outstanding stuff done. but there's a fair load of crap is floated around as well, even at top level sport, and that still amazes me to this day. And I've experienced this recently in rugby, which to the point it's astounding that.
And what type of practices are you talking about? Examples.
Just a lack of good progressive rehabilitation post injury. As simple as that, really. Just nothing really that is tangible that is going to really have any great benefit on getting a player back onto the field, and expecting time alone to heal things. Well, okay, we know time is an important element, but in the next breath, good progressive rehabilitation is hugely important, and it's part of a big picture. And even sometimes really, some of the medical
rehabilitation is just training that is modified.
Absolutely. But saying to players that for me, rehabilitation begins on day one of an injury.
Exactly.
That's just that's the way I've never changed that at all. There's a time for rest. There's also a time for passive rest. There's a term for active rest as well. But there's you could be doing something from the moment you're injured, and if you don't acknowledge that, then I think you're onto a slippery slope. And I've seen it too often where players are just left alone with very little to do, and the whole thing just looks a bit of a shambles, really. And so I think it's important for us, certainly as practitioners, to really make sure that we stay very true to our cause, and make sure that if we're dealing with someone that's injured, from the moment they're injured, we manage them from the word go, and we have them doing something, whatever that is, whatever intervention that is. And even sometimes no intervention is needed, but you've got them in the right mindset, and you're on the rehab road straight away. And I've just unfortunately seen it way too often where that's not the case, and that worries me, especially at top level sport, where there's millions and millions of pounds or Aussie dollars involved in getting these guys back to full fitness.
And if it's happening in the professional sport realm, you can imagine what's happening in your general population, run-of-the-mill physio practice down the road.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think as a whole profession, we need to be better, and I think that it needs to change at the university level first, because the thing is, the physio students are coming out and they're not prepared. They don't have the strength and conditioning knowledge, and there's a lot of things that the physio courses are missing. But there's multiple things that need to change, but I think that you need to harness these young students early on in their career when they are a student, to try and get them to start to practice the way things probably should be done. And that hybrid model, I think, is the way to go. And sounds like you agree with that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, 100%. This country is quite interesting in terms of that post physio training. There's still a great push to push people through their postgraduate rotations and make sure that they're they do a variety of things for a couple of years, which I don't think is a bad thing. It doesn't suit everybody. Some people venture off into professional sport early. They get an early opportunity to head into professional sport. Nothing wrong with doing that. Absolutely fine. I do think we need to make them a little bit more fit for purpose. And certainly undergraduate level, I'm not sure we're doing that. I'm just not sure at this moment in time we're actually achieving that very well. The physio curriculum in this country, as I'm sure it's the same as yours, it still has to be fulfilled, and there's probably not a lot of time to do those nice little added bits. But certainly exposing them to things that are pretty relevant, like the change in rehab practices these days. S&C for me, there's got to be an improvement in that at undergraduate level. And if we don't address that at some point, we're just going to keep churning out lots and lots of physios who are probably quite happy at doing lots of low-level interventions in terms of rehab. That it's okay, but actually, is it really what we're about?
Yeah,
I don't think it is. Maybe you have the same thoughts. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're just churning out a lot of physio graduates that become disillusioned with the work as a physio very quickly. I think we're attracting the wrong type of person. I think the ATAR, which is like the enter score to get into physio over here, is way too high. And it's high. It's high purely because everyone wants to do it, supply and demand, and it's attracting very intelligent people. And yes, you need to be intelligent to get through physio, but at the same time, you know, if you get a pretty good mark, you can get through it. You need a good memory. You need to be personable. But I think that a lot of people miss the point. You need to be a really outgoing, personable type of person that is going to deal well with dealing with people day to day. And you need to be empathetic. You need to be caring. You need to be creative. I think that's a big thing. People need to understand that you need to be really creative as a physio. You know, every client, even if two clients have the same, you know, quote unquote injury on MRI, you'll give them completely different rehab plans purely because the first person might go to the gym, but the second person hates exercise and will pretty much push back with everything that you give them. So you need to be very creative. So I agree. I think the S&C stuff needs to be filtered into the physio curriculums, but maybe it should be as an elective if people want to go down the line of doing the, you know, musculoskeletal sports stuff. Maybe the elective option's a good one because some people might know as soon as they get into, you know, physio school that they want to do, you know, cardiopulmonary or rehabilitation stuff in the neuro area. So, but at the same time, I still think that, you know, even if you went and did the neuro stuff, the S&C stuff is still a fundamental principle of the neuro stuff that you're doing with those clients. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've got an S&C coach colleague who who works with purely just post neuro patients, and you know, he's been extremely successful with them, really. And it's, you know, it's a good old fashioned strength and conditioning model he uses. You know, there's nothing outrageous about it at all. And you know, fundamental movement principles. It's not difficult stuff to get your head around. And I think it's relevant to most areas that we do in physio.
Yeah, agreed. And the other thing about it is it wouldn't take the uni much time to teach these kids really good S&C. You know, you give them maybe 2 small subjects, give them a subject, you know, first semester of the first year, give them another semester or another subject the next semester of the following year, and they'll be, you know, reasonably competent. A bit of practical stuff on a few times, have a bit of, you know, that sort of tutorials type of setup, and they'd be away they go. But I think they're too ingrained in what they're doing, and the unis are making a hell of a lot of money churning these kids out without putting the necessarily processes in place to allow these kids to flourish when they do finish. Yeah.
Yeah. My other concern with some of the youngsters coming out of uni is that they just become course mongerers. So just sign up for every course under the planet with actually you know, I often say to a lot of youngsters I come across, it's like, just spend a bit of time seeing patients. You know, we all make fuck ups. Make your fuck ups, learn from your fuck ups. You know, a mistake is only a mistake, you know, if you keep repeating to do that same thing, isn't it? Really, it's, you know, it just becomes a bigger issue. But if you can learn from those mistakes and then actually solidify what you're about as a physiotherapist, which is, you know, about getting people moving efficiently, effectively, and just running on basic principles, then go and learn all this nice fancy stuff. But there's such, you know, CPD, especially over there, and as I'm sure it's the same over there, it's big bucks. So everybody wants to go off and do a MINIPS course because a MINIPS course is a great thing to do. Might be, don't know, don't use them that much anymore. You know, whereas interestingly, we have a few S&C courses have started to pitch up over here a little bit more now. So a few sort of smaller intros to S&C, which is certainly starting to gain much better momentum, which I'm a big fan of. I think that's a great idea. But yeah, you know, I think just learn what we're about. Basically, it's a good starting point. That's
Yeah, I think we're starting to head in the right direction a little bit here. I think there's a lot of the new graduates are coming out and they realise that they need to be following more of this hybrid model. and the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association have an Australian Physio Association integrated course that physios can do. So then they become Australian Strength and Conditioning Association strength and conditioning coach, which is a great thing to do. And if I ever had, a new grad under me, I'd be like, that's the first thing you do. I want you to go and do that. Don't worry about all the other bullshit courses. I think that'd be the first thing I would get them to do. But like, we could talk about this for hours, but I think the nuts and bolts of it is that S&C needs to be more of the, you need to build the cake with a lot of S&C work at university, so these kids are coming out and they're prepared, because they're just not prepared at the moment. On the S&C side of things, how do you train at the moment, Simon? What do you do?
So I'm a bit of a gym bunny. Tried to get, lockdown was a bit of a disaster. However, did like everybody, got myself some weights at home, got some kettlebells, got some bands, and just cracked on. Just threw everything around that I could, which was great. I'm a big runner, so I run most mornings, pretty much every morning. But I'm a really early morning runner, so I'm normally out my cart at silly hour in the morning. So I generally try. I'm trying to avoid the rigors of old age, so just keeping myself as fit and strong as I possibly can. That's the main thing for me. I think I didn't start to properly lift till I was 51, 52.
Really?
Yeah, and I haven't progressed much after that. But in fairness, I still enjoy doing it. I'm gonna be as big as you before I get to 60, mate.
I would be surprised that what we need to do. I think the number one thing I want to do is when this whole COVID situation is, has settled down and everyone's vaccinated, I want you to take me to an F1. I really want to go to an F1. This drive to survive thing's really, increased my desire to go and see this live.
Yeah. It's good. I always used to try and arrive in Melbourne like a week early.
Yeah.
Before the race, obviously it used to be historic and still is the opener of the season, apart from obviously last year. I always used to arrive in Melbourne a week early, more so just because it obviously great place to be, and such a great race. There are a few races that I really used to just really lap up. One of which is Melbourne. Montreal is another one. Great city, nice people, just lots going on, and great places to be. It's interesting that the ones that look quite nice on TV aren't always the best to work at. So you take somewhere like Monaco, for instance, it's a great TV spectacle, but as regards, like, say, physios or the teams, it's the worst to work at, because there's no room. It's really quite small, confined areas. Just the whole logistics of how you get around the principality is just a pain in the arse, and it's quite stressful. It's stressful for the drivers. It's stressful for everybody else around them as well. But it's a great world to be involved in. Endurance motorsport's a bit different, but obviously, the lure of doing Le Mans, which was one of the things I wanted to do. That's what drove me into endurance motorsport, and that's very different. That's I've got 3 cars there and 9 drivers, so that over a 24-hour race, you've effectively got 1 in the car, 1 asleep, 1 eating for each car. And so you're literally juggling around drivers, getting one up out of bed, making sure he's fed. Another one's warming up to go into the car. Another one's coming out the car, might want to do some warm down stuff. You're making sure they're eating at the right time. And that's, I would say, in terms of a physio's role, or a physio stroke wellness coach role, that's tough. Getting people ready for 24-hour races is hard, but that's been sort of polar opposite to Formula One, but really enjoyable. I've got one thing left I want to do in motorsport, which is the Dakar Rally.
Oh yeah.
Which, with a bit of luck, I might get the opportunity to do next year. And once I've done that, my partner has said I have to can it all then. Just pack it in.
Mate, come over to Australia and come to the V8 supercars at Bathurst. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. No,
have you been to Bathurst?
So Bathurst? No, I haven't. But Bathurst is one of the races I would really like to do, because some of my endurance drivers do it every year, and it just looks absolutely amazing. They all say it's a great circuit to drive as well. So it's one of those things I'd like to do.
I've driven it personally in my Volkswagen Passat. and I looked up the numbers of what speed they are doing at certain bends, and it's just ridiculous. Like, it just blows your mind, and people don't understand until you actually drive these circuits. These guys are hooning around these bends at like crazy, like 100k plus, and you're like cruising around at 30k, shitting yourself.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's interesting with those guys, you know, if you take like the problems they have comparative to F1 boys, you know, obviously the G-forces are not the same, but you know, you've got drivers sitting in the car for, you know, maybe 2 hour, 3 hour stints. So the effects of heat, just endurance. I mean, that's a big pull. You know, they're hard events to get ready for. So, and those endurance drivers are often driving in multiple championships. So say you take your F1 driver who's doing his 20 odd races a season, which is a big call. But the motorsport endurance drivers are sometimes doing, you know, GT World Challenge, then they might be doing World Endurance Challenge as well. So they might be driving every week in some event. So these are guys who are journeymen that are working around a variety of teams, and some, you know, just pretty much on the go all year long. I mean, they're well remunerated for it, but in the next breath, it's a tough life for them. They work hard, and you know, the V8 boys I know work pretty hard as well. So yeah, it's a tough call.
Well, when all this settles down, I'd love to see you in action. Maybe I'll come over and you can put in a good word for me in the Formula One area, and maybe one of the young drivers like Pierre Gasly or someone like that. You can get me hooked up with them or something.
There's plenty of youngsters around. There's some good lads around. You got some good boys over your side, anyway. So.
Yeah. What's the young fella who's driving for Mercedes now? George Russell, is it?
George, yeah.
He's a young English fellow, isn't he?
Yeah. No, it's doing very well, and you know, depends on what Mercedes do with that second seat, whether Bottas lasts the season. Be interested to see, because he seems to be under a bit of pressure at the moment. You know, George is a Mercedes driver who's just loaned out to Williams, so you'll find a lot of the drivers. It's a bit like Mick Schumacher with Haas. So he's a Ferrari driver who's loaned out to them, and that suits both teams for a variety of reasons. One, it gives them track time, but also it just cements the technology links as well that they have. So yeah, I mean, you know, it'd be interesting to see if he gets a nudge in the seat. I think he'd be good. I think if he would be good. I mean, he drove a pretty credible race when he got in the seat. So be nice to see him get there. But
it's
F1's all about money.
Yeah, seriously.
Money.
I could not believe it when I started watching it. It's just such a boys' club as well. Like, just how they talk to each other, and like, fuck this, fuck that, fuck you. Like, they just completely tear shreds off each other. It's kind of hilarious. Like, you couldn't get away with that in a lot of other sports. It's just like, just money. The amount of money in that sport is just insane.
Yeah. So, you know, if you want to, say, for instance, you know, you've got a kid and you want to get them to Formula One, like the type of money you've got to spend is, so, you know, you're going to have to get them into karting. So karting, the season of karting is probably 150,000 euros. I know. You've got some big figures coming here, I'll tell you. So probably about 100, somewhere between 100 and 150,000 euros. So you're probably going to need to do a couple of seasons of that. Then you want to maybe progress into Formula Ford. So Formula Ford, 600,000 euros a season. You've got to come up with for that. Formula 3 is €1 million. And then, so before you even get a sniff at Formula One, you're probably $5 million down the road, 5 million euros down the road. And that's your starting point. So unless you're going to get a pitch in somewhere where you'll get picked up by one of the manufacturers, it's an expensive game, a very expensive game. I've seen plenty of wealthy men get very poor quite quickly.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy. That's blown my mind. I knew it would be expensive, but I didn't expect it to be that expensive. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy money.
That's insane.
All the drivers I know who've got kids have all said to their kids, "You're not going to drive. It's too expensive."
Yeah. Makes sense. Simon, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a heap of fun, and
great.
It's been really interesting. You know, like I didn't really know anything about this driving physio paradigm and the relationship you guys have and what you do. So it's been really interesting for me because I've never really worked in this field. So thanks, mate.
No, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's been really good.
Where can all the listeners find you? Because I know you love a selfie.
Yeah, so Instagram, Physics Sports Med, and my website, which is myself and my colleague Nick, which is www.physics.co.uk.
Sweet. Is there? Have you got any final thoughts? Any bits of advice you'd like to give the young listeners out there?
Probably just jumping back to what we said earlier on. Question everything. Don't take anything at face value. Stay true to your principles as a physio. Be kind to yourself and don't give yourself a hard time if you don't understand everything from, I think you have to be comfortable as a young physio in that you don't know everything and you can't know everything. And, I don't know everything now. And I think you have to be comfortable with that. But, and again, knock on people's doors. If you're interested in sport, go and knock on people's doors because somebody at some point will take notice of you if you piss them off enough.
Send a heap of emails.
Yeah, absolutely.
To everyone. Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely everyone.
Yeah, it's great advice. Now, this podcast is live on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks so much, Simon. Let's do it again soon. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at a Formula One race very soon.
Cheers, fella. Take care. See you soon. Bye.
Sounds good. Stay strong, guys.